And this is my first JFold, my first time in the Netherlands. I love what I have seen so far. And I love that we are back here in person. So, before I actually start, let me ask a few questions to the audience. Who here is working on DevOps? I see some hands. Okay, like half of the audience. Who here has heard about the left shift movement? A few hands. Well, this means that you as developers are going to take care of more responsibilities than before. So, and some of those responsibilities may be involved with the release process of your project or something related to that. So the idea of the tool that I'm going to demonstrate today is to help you when you have to release a project or when you have to release binaries. So my name is Almiray. I'm currently employed by Oracle. And one of the things that I do on my current job is talk about the different open source projects and products that we have in the database. That is something that happens. We allow you to run the Oracle database on test containers for free as something that just you can do at any point in time. And like that, there are other things that we can have. But today, I'm going to talk about a project that is fully open source that is not currently related to my employer. So I will give you a quick or a brief introduction of why this tool came to be, the reason of being, and then we jump into how the tool works, what it can do for you, and then we will have a demo, hopefully it will work, and then we close with what the tool may be able to do in the future. Now, because of the nature of the room, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them at any time, and I'll just repeat it for the recording. Or if you want, you can ask them later, or we'll just figure out how we do it. OK? So as a developer, one of the things that I like to do is build applications, desktop applications to be precise. This is something I've been doing for many, many years. First, I did it with Swing, and nowadays I do it with JavaFX. And just like any other engineer, once I'm done building my application, I craft a binary, I craft a distribution, and I just put it on a web page. And I hope that someone will find it, a user will discover that binary and make use of it. Or at least that's the way that I myself, as a regular software engineer, will look at these things. Hey, something is produced, and eventually someone will find it. But as it turns out, our users will prefer other ways to consume the projects or to consume the binaries. So if you are on a Mac, you might prefer to use a package or a platform packager such as Homebrew. If you're on Linux, then probably it will be something like a Snapcraft or Flatpak. Or if you're on Windows, it might be Winget or Scoop, Chocolate. There are so many choices. The point is that in order to make this work, as a producer of the project, as a producer of the binary, I need to be aware of the specific file format required for that particular package manager. Sometimes it's just a text file, maybe it's YAML, maybe it's JSON. For Homebrew, it's a Ruby formula. And if you figure it out once, then you know how to do it more times. But as you continue to do releases, you will probably would like to find a way to make things much more automated. And conversely, our users would like to consume more information about your project, such as release notes, perhaps, a changelog. They will probably would like to find, if your project happens to be open source, they would like to find what is the tag that is attached to that project, some additional metadata, right? So that was me a couple of years ago, trying to push out a particular desktop application that I wrote. And I had all these questions, and I didn't have all the answers. So I put a pause on that and started working on something else. And as an inspiration, I looked at two other projects. Even though I love Java and I work with Java almost every single day of my life, I also write code in other languages. And one of those languages happens to be Go. So I wrote, like a year ago, a small command line utility that will allow you to launch Maven or Gradle, if you're into that, with its command line or with its wrapper. And you will be able to launch the build from anywhere within the project, not just at the root. So I wrote that in Go because, well, I wanted to learn the Go programming language. And I faced the same problem. So I now have a command line utility, and I need a way to build it and to distribute it to many different uses. So I discovered a tool called JReleaser, which allows me to do this. And it's not just that. You also calculate checksums for the input files. It can sign files using PGP. It can do many things. So when I saw that tool, I said to myself, this is what I want for my Java project. I really want to make use of this. But sadly, it only works for Go projects. Almost at the same time, I discovered Jbank from Max Anderson. And Jbank is a CLI tool that allows you to launch a single source Java file like a JShell, but you can define dependencies. So it's kind of like a Java script that is self-contained, and it has more other things. So one of the things that Max did very early on was make sure that once he has produced the binary for Jbank, that he will also be able to publish it to many different distribution channels. Again, Homebrew, Chocolatey, Docker images, so many things. So one day, he and I were talking, and he told me that he has spent a lot of time doing all these things, automating these things with scripts and Gradle and Bash and so many things, just to make it work with Jbank. And I said to him, well, I just built the same thing, the same ideas with JReleaser for my Go project. And then it dawned on us, what if there was a tool that did like the things like JReleaser did, but for Java projects? What if this tool were to learn from all the lessons that Max did or applied for Jbank, but could also be done for any projects? Because if you were to look at how Jbank does its thing, it only does it for its project. If you want to reuse that knowledge, you have to copy and paste a lot of code, and that, of course, is not going to scale. So that's how, my friends, this tool came out to be. This is what is known as JReleaser. So what it is, basically, you keep using the build tool that you use already, be it Maven or Ant or Gradle or what have you. You keep producing those binaries and those releases, and you supply those as inputs plus an additional file, an additional metadata file that describes what you want to do with this project. Those you supply to the JReleaser tool, and in turn, JReleaser can create a Git release for you, be it on GitHub or GitLab or other Git services. It can also create those platform packages, Homebrew, Snapcraft, Chocolatey, and additionally, it can also announce a release to many distribution channels. Perhaps the most popular one could be Twitter or Slack or even SDKman. So how does it do it? So JReleaser started life as a simple file template engine, because what we saw at the beginning is that, oh, you need to publish to Homebrew, you have to create a Ruby formula. Based it on a file template, you just substitute some variables such as the URL, the version number, the name of the application, and off you go. And the same will happen with the other platform packages. But then it started to grow more like that. If you were to have a look at JReleaser, it is a single command, and it does everything for you in one go. It's just one package itself. Whereas in JReleaser, we figured out that if you want to do that, then you use the orange command, the one that you see on the top, that's full release. That does everything for you. Create the Git release, create the package managers, and announce the project. But if you already have a release process, and you only need to change a few things, say you want to keep the current way that you create a Git release, keep it. But if you want to add package managers, then JReleaser can do that for you, and then just invoke that particular set of commands. Or you want to create a Git release, you don't care about the packages, and you want to announce, then you can also do mix and match of all these different commands. So what you see in these columns are all the different options that you have at your disposal. You can invoke them in one go, or each one is separate from one another. I said earlier that JReleaser will expect your binaries to be built with your standard build tools, the ones I use right now. But if you would like to build, let's say, native executables using GraalVM's native image, you can do so with JReleaser. If you're building a Spring Boot application or Micronaut or Quarkus or Helidon or some other framework that already provides a GraalVM native image support, keep using that. If you're building a project that does not have that yet, JReleaser can help you building those executables. The other thing that it can do for you is build custom Java runtimes with Jlink. This is regardless if your application is modular or not, because for Jlink, this is just a matter of shrinking down the Java runtime into its smallest pieces so that you can run a particular application. One more thing that I discovered when I was building this thing is that Jlink allows you to build cross-platform Java runtimes. So if I have a machine like this one on a Mac, I can build a Java runtime for Linux, or a runtime for Windows, or for any other JDK that I have access to. And that is one of the settings that JReleaser supports. You want a Jlink for this machine? Go ahead. You want a Jlink cross-platform Java runtime for all kinds of JDKs? Go ahead in the same place. OK, I already mentioned a few names, but this is the full list of integrations that we have. If you are releasing to GitHub, then you can use the tool. And it also works for commercial products or closed-source products because it just happens to be GitHub. So whether it's a public repository or a private repository, or even if you're using GitHub Enterprise, this tool will also work. Same goes with GitLab, public, private repositories, or GitLab Enterprise. Or if you're using Gitya or Codeberg, which are also other different Git services. If you happen to be using another Git service that is not in this list right now, you can still use the tool. You will be able to tag the repository, but you won't be able to release because there is no yet API integration with that particular service. Now, besides uploading binaries, if you have them, to a Git release, you can also upload it to JFrog Artifactory. You can upload it to an HTTP or HTTPS server that is under your control, or you can also upload it to an Amazon S3 bucket. In terms of package managers, well, that's the full list. Homebrew for Linux and Mac, Chocolati for Windows, Docker, we can build Docker images for you. Jbank also allows you to launch jars across the network. Scoop is like Homebrew, but for Windows. SDKman is perhaps the way that will recommend you to keep your JDK installations up to date and other projects and other packages, such as JReleaser as well. And Snackcraft works for Linux. And in terms of distribution channels or announcers, well, we have a big list, and Telegram was the last one that we just added recently. So in terms of inputs that you supply, these are the things that you build. These are the inputs that we support. It could be a binary distribution, which is typically packaged as a zip file or a tar file. The file structure is already given, so it is expected to have a bin directory with the executable or the launcher script. There may be a lib directory when you find all the jars and any supporting files, such as the license, or README, config files, you name it, right? You can build these kind of distributions with Maven. There is the app assembler plugin or the assembly plugin. There is a Gradle plugin for this, and we also provide an archive assembler because now is a good time to say that even though we're talking about Java, if you're building or someone else is building an executable with other languages, for example, Rust, you can use JReleaser to release that kind of binaries. We also support the Uber jar or the fat jar, which you know is a single jar, maybe executable that contains all dependencies. For obvious reasons, we can also release a Jlink distribution because JReleaser can assemble those. For the same token, GraalVM native images distributions. And finally, native packages or native installers. So these are the ones that you create using JPackage, for example, or you can create it in many other different ways. In the case of Mac, that will be a DMG file or a PKG. For Windows, it's an MSI or an XE. And for Linux, it will be a div or an RPM file. So we support many different options. How would you launch such a tool? Well, depending on your platform. If you're on Mac, then use SDKman and install JReleaser. That will allow you to switch very easily from many different versions. Or you can use Jbank and launch the latest version of JReleaser, or you can also launch the latest snapshot. Or you can use Homebrew, of course, because you're on Mac. And if none of these options are your fancy, then you can go to the release page for a particular version and download either of these two zip files. The first one is universal, so for which you require a particular version of Java. So don't worry, it works with Java 8 and upwards. And that the next option, the standalone zip file, this is a cross-platform Java runtime generated with Jlink. So it comes with batteries included. You don't need a pre-existing Java version already installed in your computer, and then just off you go. For Linux, they're pretty much the same options, SDK-man, Jbank, Homebrew, or download a zip file, for which the standalone version has two flavors. One, what is compiled with Ubuntu compatible platforms, I would say. This is a JDK that is compiled with glibc, and the other is compiled with Muscle. So this is the things that you will run if you are using Linux Alpine. Finally, on Windows, SDK-man, Jbank, Scoop instead of Homebrew, and of course, download a particular zip file for your platform. You also have the choice to use a very simple Java source file as if it were a script. This particular source file will download a particular version of JReleaser on your computer. It's a single jar that you need Java 11 to run this, and then just pass the parameters, and off you go. Or you can also run it from Docker, for which we provide two different images. One is for, again, based on Ubuntu, and the other one is based on Linux Alpine. So far, I have mentioned all the ways that you can run the tool as a CLI tool. But we also support running the tool as a Maven plugin, or as a Gradle plugin, or as a set of end tasks. So we cover a wide range of different options. And of course, you can run these tools on your local machine, or you can run it on CI. You can use any of these services. We have guides that let you know how you can configure the tool to post a release of any of these CI/CD options. We have explicit support for GitHub Actions. There is a release action that can use the external configuration file, and the Docker images that we produce are already aware of the specifics for running within GitLab CI. So there's no need for you to create yet another Docker image to run JReleaser properly inside GitLab CI. OK, so that's the theory. Let's jump into the demo. So here we go. So what I have here is a very simple Maven project. It's a Maven CLI application that I just built with regular Maven, and I assemble it using the app assembler plugin and the assembly plugin. Nothing more, nothing really fancy. And the only thing that this does, if I run it, it will print out hello world, because we are very friendly. The other thing that this application has is, besides just 11 commits, is a really trivial application. If I make it a bit bigger, you can see that the names or the titles of the commits follow a particular set of prefixes, so chore or fix or fit. Now, this is a specific for the project, has nothing to do with JReleaser. But if I follow these conventions that I set forward, then JReleaser can do better stuff for us in the future. So what I'm going to do now, if we go back here at the top of the application, we'll see that there are no tags and there are no releases. So the first thing I'm going to try is create a release from my local machine. So let's see how this works. First, I need to know which version of JReleaser I have. And for that, I said I prefer to use SDK-man. So I can ask SDK-man for listing what are the current versions of JReleaser that you have access to. We have 8 releases so far, and I'm currently working on the latest snapshot. So we're going to use version 8. We can check that is true. JReleaser-b. Oh, that is not the command I want to use. JReleaser, type up. Now we go, and it tells us the metadata. So yes, this is the correct thing. Go right. Another thing, here are the sources of the project. There is no target directory. That means that there are no binaries yet. There's nothing, just the Maven POM and the Java sources. And even though there is a JReleaser YAML file there, this is the extra configuration file, we are not going to use it for now. One more thing, if I list the current remote of my Git repository, it matches the URL that I showed on the browser. OK, so that's everything that we need to know now. I'm going to ask JReleaser to create a release. And because I don't want to provide yet the model, I'm going to tell it, do auto-configure yourself. based on the metadata on the existing directory. And if there happen to be any additional environmental variables, then I will take those into consideration. So for now, it's simply say do autoconfig, and that will read the Git metadata and everything else. But I also want to say I want to release version 1.0. So here we go. We do enter, and then we see now a little bit of output on the tool with some metadata on the project. It says something like generating a changelog, then says something like calculating checksums, but it didn't find anything because there are no input files. It tried to sign some files, but we didn't configure signatures, and of course, there, again, no input files. Then it says something like try to upload. Upload is not enabled because I don't have, again, any input files. And finally, it creates a Git release in this particular URL. So we go back to the browser and do a refresh here. And now we have a tag, and we have a release. The name of the release matches a particular conversion. The tag is v100, so we follow semantic versioning. But if your project follows any other numbering schemes, we also support them. The v prefix is optional, so you can use any other prefixes or no prefixes at all. And we get all the commits as part of the changelog, and no assets. Nothing there. So far, so good. Now, you might be wondering, Andres, you just push a release to GitHub. In order to do that, you need some credentials. You need a GitHub token. Well, yes, I have a GitHub token, and it's found at this location. It's a TOML file, but it could be YAML or it could be JSON. This is the default place, but it could be any other place. You can configure it. And I'm not going to show it because it has plenty of secret configuration there. But trust me, this is where I store my GitHub token. So let me do one more thing. I'm going to format the changelog. And so I'm going to pass in additional configuration. And if I do this, I will get a failure. Care to know why? Because I already have release 100. I'm not going to re-release it or override it or drop it unless you tell the tool to do so. Well, let's do that. We say override, and there we go. It works in just a second. Thank you, Internet. So we do a refresh, and notice that now it looks a little bit different, and I have the names of the contributors. At least, well, it's only me for now. But we can do better. So we can build the project now, ask Maven to build it, and that invokes Maven, and eventually we get the tar file and the zip file. These are the binaries I want to release. And I can tell JReleaser to do it again. Oh, I'm going to supply an input file that will be found in distributions app zip1, I believe. And there we go. And notice that this time it's calculating a checksum for that input file. I did not configure signing, so it skips that. And I'm not configuring publication to JFrog, Artifactory, or Amazon. That's what is skipping the upload. But you notice that now, as part of the release, we got that zip file as an asset and the checksum. So when we do a refresh here, the change will look exactly the same, but now we got those two assets. All right. And we can keep doing this. We can add as many files as you want to. But if you start to see that, well, there's so many options that you add in the command line, it's better that we switch into defining the project using the model. And that's the thing that I'm going to showcase next. So here's the model. Contains some metadata, some section on the project, like the name of the project, the URL, the license, authors. This information comes very handy when I want to create those platform packages as Homebrew, Snapcraft, and the others. Then we see this block, release, and we want to release to GitHub. So that's what we have listed it there. Also notice that now we're saying override equals true, so I don't have to set it on the command line. And I also want to sign, so that will sign commits and tags that I make. And I want to link this release to a discussion category, which by default happens to be announcements. And the rest of the configuration that I see here is reusing or taking advantage of those prefixes that I defined earlier on my commits. So for every commit title that matches a prefix like fifth column or fixed column or chore column, then I'm going to give it a label. And using those labels, I'm going to put them into some categories. And finally, with the replacers, I'm going to remove those prefixes because their default replacement is an empty string. Also, I want to sign all the input files, and I'm going to generate a Homebrew formula, and I'm going to define my two different input files, the zip file and the tar file. As you notice this wonky syntax, you might have seen them before if you're a front or a full stack developer. These are Mustache templates. So you can think of this as a variable within your format. And then the value of this variable will be evaluated to the name of distribution, so that will be app. And the project version will be whatever number you have for your current release. OK, so now that we have that, I'm going to do one more thing, because if you noticed, there was no project version in that metadata file. I can show it here on the top. I could have added version here, but I'm not. So that if I define the version number as an environmental variable, my model file will become stable, and I just have to switch the version number in using the environment. So I'm going to export this. I'm going to export an environmental variable that has to follow this particular name. That should be JReleaser project version, and the version number will be 100. And the next thing I'm going to do is do JReleaser full release. So here we go. No more auto configuration. You see that, again, the checksums are taken into account, and I'm also signing files. And there comes the uploading of all those assets, and then the creation of a Homebrew formula, for which is going to be placed on GitHub, because that's where my current project is hosted, and added to that particular repository, which will be created automatically for you based on certain conventions if it's not there yet. OK, so I can go back here and do a refresh. Now look, my changelog looks different. Now has emojis, has categories. There are no prefixes. They are all categorized. They look much better. I also am able to put the username of the contributors, and I have all the different assets, the binaries, the checksums, and the signatures. Look here. There is a button that says Join Discussion. Let's click on that one. And now, that moves me into Discussion tab of my project, and I can see the whole text of the project, and anyone can make any comments on the project. So this is how easy it is to create Git releases with metadata on your project. And as you saw, I just did it for my local environment. I did not have to do this on CI. But you can certainly do so, because JReleaser runs on pretty much all the CI options that I show you. So if you are into GitHub, well, I guess this is nice. But if you happen to be using other Git services, such as GitLab, well, the good news is that we support that as well. So surprise, surprise, it's the same project, but with a few changes. So let me switch to that directory. And you see here, trust me, they are the same sources. We can build the project, invoke Maven once again, and that runs the build. OK, perfect. And the model has two changes. The first one, as you see in line 16, we're going to release to GitLab. And the second one is that GitLab is not aware of any discussions. That's a GitHub-only feature. So we take it out. The rest of the file is identical to creating releases to GitHub. So now we do that. I just scroll in the history so you can tell that I'm using the same command as before, and do a full release. And this will calculate the checksums, do the signings, create a release, upload the assets, and create a Homebrew formula for you. But this time on GitLab. And while this is working, you can tell here that there are no tags, right? So while that is working, I can show you on GitHub the Homebrew formula that we created. So we go into the Homebrew tab directory, formula, which was just updated 3 minutes ago, and we see a file based on a template. This is a template that already is provided by JReleaser, but you can provide your own templates as well if this is not good enough. there is an URL that points to GitHub and the checksum for that particular file. So that will come in handy in just a moment. We go back here on GitLab and do a refresh, and take a look here on the number of tags that will appear. Now, there is one tag. When I click on the tag, there's a release. I click on the release, and there are the release assets and the changelog that looks very much identical to what we saw on GitHub. And because we publish a Homebrew formula, we'll find it on the Homebrew tab repository. And there's the formula updated just a moment ago. And just like on GitHub, it's based on the same template, but two differences, the URL and the checksum. I'm not done yet. I can also do it for Gitya or Codeberg. Same project, no releases, but two changes in this case. Actually, let's make one more change. So let's edit JReleaser. And we see that now we are releasing to Codeberg. There are no discussions, because, again, Gitya has no notion of discussions. But I'm not going to make an announcement. And now, besides announcing to my local Twitter, my local Discord, I'm going to be very bold and do a live tweet on JFall. So let's activate this always, right? And now I'm going to say something like status will be release and project version. Or actually, yeah, project version of project name. That is not the correct one. So it's sensitive, case sensitive. And then I say add JFall 2021. OK. I think it's OK. Well, maybe I can put this into quotes just to be extra safe. And to be sure that this is going to work, I can also display what is the current model. What does JReleaser would look like if I were to run this? There's no build, so let's build it. It needs the artifact. So at least JReleaser will tell me, oh, you're trying to release something, but it's not there yet. So maybe if you build it, I will be able to read it. All right. So here we go. Here's the model. And that tells me that that's all the information that is going to be applied when generating the Homebrew formula. And those are the two artifacts that I want to release. Yes, thank you very much. And here are the two announcers. So that's the text message that is going to be sent to Discord. And this is the text that is going to be sent on Twitter. And more information, such as the secrets for signing. Remember, those are found on my secrets config file. And one more thing that I can do, just to be sure that nothing is really wonky, I can say JReleaser, full release, and I want you to run in dry run mode. I'm just going to give it a try. Is it going to work or not? So here we go. And it says, yeah, I calculate the checksums. I do the uploading, but actually it's fake. It did not create a release. Again, it's a dry run mode, so it will not affect any remote servers or operations. And then creates the Homebrew formula, and finally tweets something and sends a message. But actually, these messages are not there yet. And I can show you, if I switch to my Discord channel, there are no messages. How does JReleaser know that it will send a message to Discord channel? It uses the webhook integration. Because anyone that has access to that webhook URL will be able to send messages. I'll treat it as a secret. But if you want to, you can put it directly on the configuration file. OK, so now I'm going to do it for real. So the only thing that I have to do is run it without dry run. So it did not calculate the checksums again because it has it done already. And there are no changes in the input. So it has a little bit of a smart caching. Signs, uploads, creates the formula, and publishes two messages. So when I go back here on my Discord channel, now I have a message. I click on that URL, and there's the changelog that we saw earlier, and we have all the different assets. And of course, because we configure Homebrew, there should be a Homebrew formula, and it's right there. And it just looks very similar to what we saw earlier, based on those templates. But what about that tweet? Twitter, Almiray, And here we go. I did not post any URL, so it just looks like that. But this is live, coming from JFile 2021. All right. So just like this, there are a few other things that the tool can do, specifically with the different services that you want to use. And of course, I show it with a project that publishes some sort of binaries. But if your project does not publish any binaries, and if you would like to have a Git release integration, you can certainly do so. If it's a library, or if it's just a set of POM files, you can make it happen. So here's a project, the Moditech project. Anyone has heard about the Moditech project? That allows you to keep Java 8 compatibility, but still have full module descriptors, so from Java 9 and onward? No? Anyone that is building modular applications and still wants to retain compatibility with Java 8, please have a look at this particular project. Makes things much easier. This is just a regular Maven project with a Maven plugin, nothing more. And if you click on this release tag, well, they also have their own categories. And the way that they build this release, or they publish the release, is using the Maven JReleaser plugin, which is found in the POM file. So of course, this will be XML, and we can search for JReleaser, and there is the JReleaser Maven plugin with some configuration. So instead of YAML, this is XML, and these are pretty much the same elements that we saw configured in the YAML format. A bit more verbose, maybe, but it does the trick. Here's another project that I can show you. This is a Quarkus application that creates native executables. It's a CLI tool that allows you to connect to Kafka Connect, kind of like kubectl, but for Kafka Connect. That's the idea. And because it creates native executables with GraalVM, we have to run it in the specific platform. So we use GitHub Actions to build the 3 different executables, and the same GitHub action to collect those binaries and then release them through JReleaser. So that's why, if you click here on releases, you see this early access tag with the current commit is that, and in the assets, we see those 3 different binaries. And this project, once again, is configured using the JReleaser plugin. There we go, latest version, by the way, and that's the list of assets that we're going to release. There are more things that I can show you about JReleaser, such as the documentation is currently hosted here. It contains everything that you need to know about the tool in order to get started with what you want to use the CLI or Maven or Gradle, and here you go. If you want to know more about all the different options in detail, well, here are the list of all the different goals that you have access in Maven. All the names of the goals is not coincidence. They match the same workflows that I was showing before. And if you happen to switch to Gradle, same deal. And if you use the tool, same names. So it's very easy to move from one another. If you want to know how to configure something, let's say, for example, let's use another announcement, the latest one, Telegram. Well, this is what you have to do in order to configure it for YAML. You don't like YAML? OK, switch to TOML, or JSON, or Maven, or Gradle. Every single bit of configuration that we expose in the site is done in the 5 different formats. So it's easy to move from one format or the other. And finally, there are some examples that you can find there. Here's an example for generating cross-platform Jlinks, Java Runtimes with Jlink, a Quarkus application similar to KCCuddle, or a Spring Boot, or a Micronaut application, again, with GraalVM and JReleaser. And another question that comes in very often is, Andres, does JReleaser release itself? Because, hey, it's a CLI application, right? Well, yes, it does, since the first release. And so we built a snapshot, and then we bootstrap ourselves. So here's the full documentation for that particular project. It's a little bit more elaborate, because as you saw, we are able to have standalone versions or standalone launchers for the project. So I can show you here. If we navigate to JReleaser, the latest release, here's our release page. We follow a different convention for this project to do the changelog. And then here are all the assets. And all these standalone custom Java runtimes were generated or assembled using JReleaser. So the last bit that I want to showcase in terms of repositories is that you remember that Jbank was one of the inspirations. Well, if you navigate to Jbank, this is a repository of the project. You click here on the latest release. They use conventional commits, a feature that we added support for in the latest version. And this release has been posted using JReleaser. So we come back full circle. Max was able to delete most of the configuration that was explicitly done for Jbank and reuse a tool that was born out of necessity inspired by Jbank itself. So that's pretty much the demo. It didn't blow. Great. So what's coming on in the future for the tool? We have a few ideas, but we depend on your feedback to let us know where this tool could go. For example, I did a poll a couple of weeks ago, and turns out that Bitbucket is still very popular among Java developers. So perhaps supporting Bitbucket. Right now, they don't have a release feature per se. You have to use a combination of other tools. But we can make it happen. Or maybe it's Azure DevOps, or maybe something else. We saw that we can publish to Amazon S3 buckets. But of course, there are other cloud providers. If you would like to use other cloud providers, then we could perhaps also support those as well. And just like we did with Jlink and GraalVM native image, that you can build it from the outside, or you can use JReleaser, we can also look at the option of building those native installers with JPackage, but within JReleaser. Why? Because some of the metadata required for building those native installers is also already defined in the JReleaser metadata. So there are a few resources for you. The homepage of the project that I'll show you, where we have all the documentation and everything you would like to know about JReleaser. The documentation is searchable, by the way. The homepage of the project is hosted at that GitHub organization, where we have other repositories as well. If you happen to use the tool and you find it useful, and you would like to sponsor the project or contribute in a way, we have an open collective. And of course, we have a Twitter account when we post announcements or things to know about JReleaser. Everything that we saw today is open source. If you have not contributed to open source before, let me tell you, it's very, very simple. If you find a problem with anything that we saw today or any other open source project library dependency that you consume in your daily work, file a ticket. That's it. There's nothing extra that you need to do. But if you've had the time and the passion, you can engage further with the team and set a patch, set a test case, or maybe even become a contributor. But you don't have to go all the way if you don't want to. Just by filing a ticket when something is not working properly, or if you find a missing feature or something extra about that project, is plenty of help for us open source developers. In that, I would like to say that in the month of October, we received plenty of updates coming from our community. And one of the things that we receive is a translation. So if I run JReleaser passing a different flag for the language, for example, that will be user language equals Dutch. And I say JReleaser, so it shows me the help. There we go. It's kind of Dutch. It was provided by a Flemish guy. But it looks good. I mean, from my eyes, it looks good. But of course, it will look a little bit better because that's my native tongue, Spanish. Or I can certainly regale you with something even more exotic. I guess Japanish didn't work. Why? That's weird. Hindi. It didn't work either. That's weird. Anyway, so we got a Dutch translation. And if it's not correct, we are accepting contributions. OK, so that's everything that I have for you today. There's plenty more things that I can show, and I can talk by hours and hours about these things, but we have to wrap it up. And so thank you very much for your time. I hope that you find this tool useful. You can use it, again, in an open source fashion or in a closed source, or in a commercial fashion. We have received contributions from people making sure that the tool works correctly on GitHub Enterprise and GitHub Enterprise and a few other things. I have names of companies that are using the tool. I cannot disclose those names, but I can certainly tell you they are using the tool in a commercial fashion. So just use it, and if you find it, you find something that is not working properly, let me know. I'll fix it. And if you think it's cool, then just spread the word and keep using it. Thank you very much.